So many thanks to the Center for Law, Culture, and History for sponsoring this and for inviting me to participate and be on this panel with so many people whose work I've admired for so long. And I especially want to thank Rick for writing this book. When I first read Is Marriage for White People, I was struck by how utterly familiar the stories Rick was talking about felt to me. Reading this book reminded me of conversations I'd had in college or in law school with African-American female friends, and of articles that I'd read in Essence and Ebony growing up. And so in that sense, the issues that Rick is surfacing in the book are not necessarily new ones, at least not to members of the Black community. These are issues that we've been talking about for a very long time. What Rick has done, and I think he should be applauded for it, is to ventilate these issues to a much broader audience than heretofore they've been ventilated before. And that's an act, I think, of not only vision, but also of courage. And Rick is to be commended for that. But to paraphrase Mark Antony, I have not come to praise Rick, at least not entirely. Although I admire the courage and the vision of this book, I too have criticisms, and I've read the book a number of times now, and although I am struck by the familiarity of the stories, what I'm also struck by is Rick's durable faith in marriage as an institution. And I'm not surprised by Rick's faith, his durable faith, his blind faith in marriage, because in our society, marriage matters a whole lot. Historically, marriage has been the means of providing for economic security, traditionally for women and children, but more recently with the advent of the dual earner marriage, it's also been a way to provide for men and women alike. It's been a way to ensure access to health care. It's been a way to ensure access to immigration privileges. Marriage means something. But what if marriage mattered less to Rick and to all of us? Now, if marriage mattered less, I propose, Rick's tale of single, well-educated Black women who have prospered in their careers and who have built fulfilling lives without men would seem more celebratory and less sad. Maybe we wouldn't see these women as unlucky and unfortunate, but rather as progress narratives that suggest that women, and Black women in particular, have made great strides, even in the face of persistent race and gender discrimination. If marriage mattered less, maybe these women would be more likely to take on the challenges of single parenthood. Certainly they would recognize what those challenges were, but importantly, perhaps they would be free from the stigma of illegitimacy that continues to haunt those who decide to parent outside of marriage. And perhaps paradoxically, if marriage mattered less, instead of the unhappy mixed-class marriages that Rick documents in his book, women would feel no compunction to marry down or to marry at all in order to have a satisfying and fulfilling life. So basically, my trouble with this book is not in the question that it asks, is marriage for white people, but in the question that it leaves unasked and unanswered. Is marriage for anyone, and should it be? So I recently read another book by another Rick. It was Rick Perlstein's Nixonland, The Rise of a President and the Fracturing of America. And in that book, Perlstein documents the way in which President Richard Nixon's Southern strategy emphasized that criminality and social malaise could be attributed to bad choices made at the level of the individual and at failures that occurred at the level of the private family. On this account, the social safety net, the Great Society and social welfare more generally, became suspect, and personal responsibility and individual choice became watchwords of the right. And again, this is the basis for the neoliberalist turn that we see now in our political life. Instead of public solutions to social ills, this neoliberalist turn focused on the private sphere, the family and the individual, and the choices made in those venues to remedy these broad social problems. In many ways, this Rick's book is the unwitting heir to Nixonland. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way, because I think Rick is seriously thinking about the challenges facing the Black community. But the approach is very similar to that Southern strategy that Nixonland documents, and it underscores the appeal of this public-private dichotomy that is at the basis of that neoliberalist turn. So in his book, Rick underscores the importance of private solutions to public problems. How do we fix the economic plight of the Black community? By focusing on its families, by stabilizing the Black family, by achieving more and better marriages. And how do we get more and better marriages for this beleaguered constituency? We focus on the individual choices that individuals make. So instead of looking at broader problems, focus on getting individual black women to make better choices about how and with whom they partner. And like the neoliberalist turn identified in Nixonland, this book obviates, in a lot of ways, a serious discussion of whether public interventions might be necessary to supplement or even to supplant some of these private solutions. So Rick does discuss the problems of mass incarceration and the uneven educational prospects of black men and black women, but at many points in the book, I wondered if he too believes that these are problems that can and should be remedied at the individual level rather than broad systemic and structural issues that require more robust public interventions. And in the same vein, though he spends considerable time discussing the economic fragility of black families and suggests that marriage, specifically to one's economic peer in and outside of the race, is a suitable solution for this problem. But I wonder if maybe there's room for a bigger solution, whether public investment in individuals, for example, a more robust social safety net, which is a hallmark in Scandinavian countries where there's very little marriage, but also far fewer fragile families, whether that might do the job as well or indeed better than the solutions that Rick has proposed. So suffice it to say that my trouble with the book is that it credits without questioning marriage's already overdetermined position in our society, and it assumes that everyone who can get married should get married. And in doing so, it reinforces the intuition that marriage is and should be the way we recognize relationships and acts that we deem worthy. It should be the way that we privatize the dependency of our most vulnerable members, rather than allowing the state to step in and perhaps share some of that responsibility. And I wonder if this intuition is a correct one. And I'm thinking specifically of the events of the last couple of years. These events, more than anything, I think, challenge the intuition that marriage should be the way we address these vulnerabilities. As financial institutions have crumbled and buckled, marriage has been an unreliable guarantor of economic security for African Americans and for everyone else. It is clear, or at least I think it should be clear, that marriage can't be our de facto social safety net, that other interventions are needed. So I have been critical of this book, and I am critical of some of the ideas that propose, but I'm not surprised by the question that Rick asks and the solution that he identifies. It's unsurprising the scholar of Rick's stature would focus on marriage, because we are all focused on marriage. We have been focused on marriage for generations, and we continue to be focused on marriage. But the question that Rick has asked, is marriage for white people, is probably not the only question that we should be asking. And I want to push back on the question, not because of the solutions that Rick proposes, which I think are controversial but interesting, but I think we should push back on it because there's a bigger question that we haven't yet addressed. And that question is whether marriage should be for anyone, or whether there is another way to address some of the ills that face us without ushering all of us into the marriage bucket. So that's the question I propose to Rick. Should we continue to place our faith in marriage, or is there something else that we should be thinking of, and should marriage matter less than it does for black people and for everyone?
Okay. So we're going to be here till tomorrow morning, I think.
I'll cut you off.
This is, okay, so I should say, first of all, I am just so happy to be here. This is a first in many occasions. This is my first book. It's also my first chance to share the stage.